It's really interesting here that a few years on YouTube and Twitter and reading this stuff and getting more involved in like researching this stuff. Being an academic doesn't guarantee that you've read anything that you talk about. It doesn't. I don't know. You would think. So we have a person who identifies. It's whoa. Slavoj. The only explanation I would have for this being him is that he's another boomer who bit the dust mentally during the pandemic. Let's start with Zizek. So Zizek wrote an article in this magazine called Compact that apparently are a bit weird. I don't know much about them. As far as I've seen, this is the first page I've seen of Compact. The aesthetic looks pretty good, you know. It's a decent font. It's a what? Yeah, we have a whole thing here. He's a contributing editor. He's written articles for these guys before. He's actually been one of the better ones when it's come to Ukraine, as far as leftists go. Especially since he's like one of the leftist old guard, I guess now. But this article from 5 days ago, apparently not good. But let's see. Oh, okay. Shall I do it in his accent? Some claim that wokeness is on the wane. No, okay. In fact, it is gradually being normalized, conformed to even by those who inwardly doubt it, and practiced by the majority of academic, corporate, and state institutions. This is why it deserves more than ever our criticism, together with its opposite, the obscenity of the new populism and religious fundamentalism. Let's begin with Scotland. Hey, that's me. Where Nicola Sturgeon's government pushed wokeism and LGBT causes almost to the end. In December 2022, it hailed a historic day for equality after Scottish lawmakers approved plans to make it easier for individuals to legally change their gender, extending the new system of self-identification to 16 and 17-year-old. Basically, you declare what you feel you are, and you are registered as what you want to be. That word basically is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. So he was almost... It's really interesting here that a few years on YouTube and Twitter and reading this stuff and getting more involved in like researching this stuff. Being an academic doesn't guarantee that you've read anything that you talk about. It doesn't. I don't know. You would think he would know that there is still a procedure, a vetting procedure of between 3 and 6 months after you do this declaration, where you do have to go through a procedure to make sure that you haven't just like fraudulently changed your gender identity for like no reason. The self-ID thing was just streamlining. It meant you don't need to have gender dysphoria anymore, but there is still a procedure to show that where professionals will assess your case to confirm that you're actually sincere and that you've given some thought into your gender identity, not just that you've like done it on a whim. So, this sentence so far, Zizek, not too sure, buddy. All right. A predictable problem emerged when Isla Bryson, a biological male convicted of rape, was remanded to a women's prison in Stirling. Okay. This wasn't a predictable problem because this had nothing to do with this. Like, this article's terrible. This article's disgusting. The self-ID law had nothing to do with this. She was only in the women's prison for a risk assessment and then moved. That's it. And you know what's really annoying about this is that like we have been doing segregation for sex offenders for a really long time anyway. There's a prison museum a little bit out of town from like an old prison that's lasted since the 1800s all the way up until like I think the 90s was when it closed. But in that prison museum, they show you there's a separate cell block. It's an all men's prison, but they had a separate cell block for sex offenders. So even within a particular gender's prison, segregation of sex offenders is a normal thing. Like, but in this case, Isla was segregated for like 2 days for a risk assessment period and then moved to a male prison because it had nothing to do with the self ID law. Gender recognition certificates are not the things that get you access to a prison. Anyway, Bryson decided that he was no longer a man only after appearing in court on a rape charge. So we have a person who identifies its whoa Slavoj brought itself as a woman using its penis to rape 2 women. Oh. Ooh. It is quite logical. If maleness and femaleness have nothing to do with one's body and everything to do with one's subjective self-definition, then one must put a penis-having rapist in prison with captive women. Again, even if you accept this, like, if you accept self-ID laws for gender recognition certificates, no, that doesn't actually mean you have to put a rapist in prison with cis women. That doesn't actually mean you have to do that. This fucking Isla person could have even been just put into like a separate section, into a separate block of the women's prison. She could have done that as well. But no, I think the problem is that, like, I know there are some people on the self-ID side who will take this extreme position that, like, the minute you declare yourself a trans woman, you go into the women's prison. Like, so if I get convicted of whatever, I can be like, oh, I'm coming out now. And they put me. There are people who believe that and they think that's the progressive way to go, but they are a minority, okay? No one gives a fuck about them, right? It looked like the giga progressive SNP handled everything about as well as they could have on the legal and practical side here. They rhetorically fumbled it completely. They didn't do very well at pushing it to the public and explaining it to people, but I don't know what the issue was here. Was like, it was like the fact that like this Isla person didn't have legal gender recognition. She didn't have a gender recognition certificate. So why was it predictable that she was moved into the women's prison? Like, this is this whole story was just the biggest red herring. And you know what it is as well? It's because it happened in fucking Scotland that no one read the story. No one looked into what happened because it's not in there. Like, this is what I really don't like about when people cover political issues outside of their own country. Like, people just don't put in the effort. You can really tell because no one seems to have understood what the fuck happened here. But, all right. Sturgeon resigned because she alienated a part of the population that isn't anti-LGBT, but simply rejects such measures. We've looked into this as well. Her polling has experienced dips in the past, some that were bigger than this one. There's no way of confirming that she resigned because of the anti-LGBT thing. You could say it might have been one of the straws that broke the camel's back, but at the end of the day, like, she's been there for a really long time and she's had drops in popularity before that were worse than this. So, excuse me. The point here is that there is no easy solution because sexual identity is in itself not a simple form of identity, but a complex dimension full of inconsistencies and unconscious features, something that in no way can be established by a direct reference to how we feel. The recent controversy about the use of so-called puberty blockers concerns another aspect of this same complexity. So-called, why is he saying, anyway. The Tavistock Clinic in London was ordered by higher authorities to restrict the use of puberty blockers that suppress hormones and in this way pause a child's development of sex-based characteristics such as breasts. Tavistock was administering these drugs to youngsters between 9 and 16 who appeared not to be able to choose their sexual identity. Tavistock's clinicians reasoned that there is a danger that youngsters who can't determine their sexual identity would make an enforced choice under the pressure of their environment, thus repressing their true inclination to be trans mostly. Puberty blockers were necessary to allow such youth to postpone their entry into puberty, granting them more time during which to reflect on their sexual identity before deciding on it at a more mature age. Puberty blockers were administered to almost all children sent for assessment at Tavistock, including two autistic and troubled youngsters, who may have been misdiagnosed as uncertain about their sexuality. He keeps confusing sexuality with gender identity. That's weird. In other words, life-altering treatments were being given to vulnerable children before they were old enough to know whether they wanted to medically transition. As one of the critics said, a child experiencing gender distress needs time and support, not to be set on a medical pathway they may later regret. Again, puberty blockers are not a medical pathway. That's not actually what they are. The point of puberty blockers is to delay puberty so that they have more time to decide, more time to grow into themselves, like socially, so that they can figure out what exactly they want. But the thing with Tavistock is it does see, again, I'm really hesitant because I've only listened to like a podcast on this and then read like a couple of articles, but it's really hard to, like, I haven't read any proper like official report or anything. So I don't know exactly what was happening there, but it might be the case. It might be the case that people were giving away trans treatment like too liberally, like more so than the average clinic would. And it seems to be the case now that there are maybe a few hundred or up to 1,000 patients since the 80s, I think, that are maybe going to file a lawsuit against them or at least have complained, which is about 5% of people who've been through the clinic are expressing some kind of disappointment. So, yeah, I don't know exactly what's happening there. It's very possible, though. It's possible that there have been a few places in the world where they've affirmed like too quickly. But again, that's because this is a fairly new treatment. So you would expect uh, things like that to happen. And then the resolution, I would imagine, would be to try and find a middle ground where you don't leave kids to go through a puberty that they don't need to go through that could be incredibly damaging for their mental health or even lead to them dying, to lead to them killing themselves. But again, there's a ground between that and also having a detransition rate of like 10%, you know? So yeah, it would make sense that there are issues like that, but that doesn't mean it's like the evidence still points overwhelmingly that some kind of trans treatment for under 18s is acceptable and actually like an overall net positive to have access to that. It's just there are arguments over the procedure by which you find out whether a kid qualifies for that or not. That's maybe the bits that's not settled. Anyway, the paradox is clear. Puberty blockers were given to allow youngsters to pause maturity and freely decide about their sexual identity. But these drugs may also cause numerous other physical and psychic pathologies, and nobody asked the youngsters if they were ready to receive drugs with such consequences. Dr. Hilary Cass, one of the critics, wrote, "We have no way of knowing whether, rather than buying time to make a decision, puberty blockers may disrupt that decision-making process. Brain maturation may be temporarily or permanently disrupted." Don't these arguments also ignore that medical errors are made in all the time in other fields? Yeah, that's a big problem as well, is that I think even with Tavistock, I think there were 20,000 kids who have received treatment over a few decades in Tavistock. I think, and it looks like the highest number they're expecting in terms of complaints is about 1,000. So even if we take that, that would suggest like a failure rate of what, like 5%, which is still, if you have 1,000 kids fucking suing you, that's probably a problem. Or 1,000 families, but it doesn't mean that medical transition blockers HRT for kids is like needs to get thrown out the fucking window because there's no research. Like the research doesn't say that. The research says that I think current medical guidelines are that with enough professional and parental oversight and support, like a child under the age of 18, like an adolescent, can actually have a pretty robust uh, sense of their own gender identity, and they can meaningfully consent to treatments before they turn 18. That's what the current medical recommendation is. But yeah, anyway. One should take a step even further in this criticism and question the very basic claim that arriving at sexual identity is a matter of mature free choice. There's nothing abnormal in sexual confusion. What we call sexual maturation is a long, complex, and mostly unconscious process. It is full of violent tensions and reversals, not a process of discovering what one really is in the depth of one's psyche. I don't know where Zizek is learning about sexuality and gender identity from. I have a feeling he's probably the kind of wanker that would consult like Freud or something. I don't know. At many gender clinics across the West, doctors feel compelled to adopt an unquestioning affirmative approach, one critic noted, with little regard to other underlying mental health crises troubling children. The pressure is, in fact, twofold. For one thing, clinicians are cowed by the trans lobby, which interprets skepticism regarding puberty blockers, as a conservative attempt to make it more difficult for trans individuals to actualize their sexual identity. This is compounded by a financial compulsion. More than half of Tavistock's income, for example, came from the treatment of youngsters' sexual troubles. In short, what we have here is the worst combination of politically correct badgering with the brutal calculation of financial interests. The use of puberty blockers is yet another case of woke capitalism. What, the NHS? Bro, is there any evidence that the research on transition for kids is being pushed by a lobby, a powerful lobby? Is there actually any evidence of this? Like, I feel like if you were a medical institution, you would want to treat transition if it was purely financial. It would be in your interest to treat transition with something like the same way you would treat some kind of like body dysmorphia or something like that, where instead of like a bunch of really expensive surgeries and all that, plus therapy, plus years of like oversight and documentation and professionals gathering notes and keeping records and shit, you would just treat it like something that like they need therapy for. That's it. Whereas now it's like therapy plus gender identity like professionals plus professional evaluations plus extended periods to try and make sure there's consistency plus fucking medication, blockers, HRT, surgery. Like, this is not a financial, this is not like, especially if you're like a nationalized healthcare system. I feel like if you're working in medicine, it would be much easier just to like do it through therapy rather than going through all this extra research and all that. A ton of man hours not even, no, not completely though, because like all the research that this takes for health institutional, that a lot of that's to do with government money, right? I think even in the United States, it's not the case that a lot of like research into medical stuff, it comes from like academia and all that. Like, isn't that public money? Isn't that where they would have more of an incentive to cut costs? Even though, am I wrong? I mean, definitely in Europe, where like the state actually has quite a lot of input into paying for healthcare stuff. You'd think if there was a cheaper option, they would go for that. I don't even know why I need to use that hypothetical though. Because he could also just say, the reason we don't do conversion therapy for trans youths, with the reason we don't treat it like some kind of like delusion or like disorder like anorexia or bulimia or fucking the reason we don't treat it like a kind of dysmorphia that you can get around with therapy is because it doesn't work. That's why we don't do that. Like, that's the best reason for it. You can, like, if you look at the research, the best reason for allowing adolescents to go on puberty blockers and HRT in some circumstances is because that's the best option. It's because it yields the best results for the lowest cost. That's why they choose that. It's just backed by research. Like, anyway, at least more so than any other conclusions. More so than what fucking Dave Mustard Stain 1990 is saying in chat. Anyway, we'll come back to that. Woo! As if I'm so tired. Oh my god. Okay. As if interest group agitation and the compulsions of capital weren't enough, wokeness can also draw upon reserves of religious strength. In our official ideological space, of course, wokeness and religious fundamentalism appear as incompatible opposites. But are they really? Oh, here's the Zizek shit coming out. God, fuck. Okay. Nearly a decade ago, the ex Muslim activist Mariam was invited by London's Goldsmith College to lecture on the topic Apostasy, Blasphemy, and Free Expression in the Age of ISIS. Her talk, which focused on Islamic oppression of women, was repeatedly and rudely disrupted by Muslim students. Did she find allies among the college's feminist society? No. The feminists sided with the Goldsmiths Islamic Society. I don't believe anything Zizek says anymore, but I have heard of this sometimes where Muslim feminists get annoyed at Western feminists because of their defenses of um, the parts of Islam that the world probably doesn't really need anymore, right? Like the like especially like fucking I can't remember, there was this like Muslim feminist podcast I listened to like years ago talking about like Western feminists who simp for the hijab and how much they like thought that was really cringe or like really frustrating to deal with. But yeah, I don't know. Again, I would take all that with a pinch of salt. I have no idea if this actually happened. Anyway, this unexpected solidarity is ultimately grounded in the similarity in form of the two discourses. Wokeness operates as a secularized religious dogma with all the contradictions this implies. John McWhorter, a black critic of racial wokeness, has enumerated some of them in his recent book, Woke Racism. You must strive eternally to understand the experiences of black people. You can never understand what it is to be black, and if you think you do, you're a racist. Show interest in multiculturalism. Do not culturally appropriate. This is no exaggeration. Anyone who doubts the movement's repressive potential would be well advised to read A Professor Trapped in Anti-Racist Hell. A black professor, sorry. Vincent Lloyd's account of Compact of his encounter with wokeness at its worst. Lloyd's credentials are impeccable. A black professor and director of the Center for Political Theology at Villanova University, he is the former director of his university's Black Studies program, leads anti-racism and transformative justice workshops, and publishes books on anti-black racism and prison abolition, including the classic text Black Dignity: The Struggle Against Domination. In the summer of 2022, Lloyd was asked by the Telluride Association to lead a 6-week seminar on race and the limits of law in America, attended by 12 carefully selected 17-year-olds. 4 weeks later, 2 of the students had been voted out by their fellows, and Lloyd himself was soon ostracized and booted. It's all these anecdotes. Ugh, I don't know if they're true. God. Ugh. In his last class, each student read from a prepared statement about how the seminar perpetuated anti-black violence in its content and form, how the black students had been harmed, how I was guilty of countless microaggressions, including through my body language, and how students didn't feel safe because I didn't immediately correct views that failed to treat anti-blackness as the cause of all the world's ills. People are saying this one is true. Okay. I believe you guys. You guys are more reliable than this fucking prominent academic who's written like 50 books. Yeah. That's the world we live in. I'll go with it. Okay. Lloyd compares these trends to that moment in the 70s when leftist organizations imploded. The need to match and raise the militancy of one's comrades, leading to a toxic culture filled with dogmatism and disillusion. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, we're punching left, boys. Uh-oh. His critics relied on a series of dogmas, among them, there is no hierarchy of oppressions except for anti-black oppression, which is in a class of its own. Trust black women. Prison is never the answer. All non-black people and many black people are guilty of anti-blackness. Oh, God. I'm bringing out the old white habitus theory. I don't know. Butchered, maybe, but, you know. But more crucial than content was the conflict of forms between seminar and workshop. Lloyd tried to practice the seminar, an exchange of opinions. One intervention builds on another, and as one student notices what another student overlooked, and as the professor guides the discussion towards the most important questions. Seminars usually focus on a particular text, and the participants try to uncover its meaning patiently. By contrast, in the sort of anti racist workshop that Lloyd critiques, the dogma is clearly established, and the exchange focuses on how and where somebody knowingly or unknowingly violated it. As Alenka Zupancic has noted, the universe of PC workshops is the universe of Bertolt Brecht's thing. Everybody says yes again and again, and the main argument against those who are not accepted as sincere partisans is harm. Here is how harm works, according to Lloyd. During our discussion of incarceration, an Asian American student cited federal inmate demographics. About 60% of those incarcerated are white. The black students said they were harmed. They had learned in one of their workshops that objective facts are a tool of white supremacy. Outside of the seminar, I was told the black students had to devote a great deal of time to making right the harm that was inflicted on them by hearing prison statistics that were not about blacks. A few days later, the Asian American student was expelled from the program. What the this doesn't read like... I've read a lot of Zizek's articles. This doesn't sound like him. The only... The only explanation I would have for this being him is that he's another boomer who bit the dust mentally during the pandemic. He's just another old manny who lost his shit during lockdown. Is that really it? Is he just another one of those now? Bruh. Amogus Ryer, true. Oh. Two things should surprise us here. First, this new cult combines belief in fixed, objectivized dogmas with full trust in how one feels, although only the oppressed blacks have the right to infer their feeling as the measure of racist guilt. A critical confrontation of arguments plays no role, which implies that open debate is a racist white supremacist notion. Objective facts are a tool of white supremacy. Yeah, so that as Trumpists used to say, we need to generate alternative facts. Facts! To be clear, there's a kernel of truth in this. Those who are brutally oppressed can't afford the deep reflection and well elaborated debate needed to bring out the falsity of liberal humanist ideology. But in this case, as in most other cases, those who appropriate the role of the leaders of the revolt are precisely not the brutalized victims of the racist oppression. The woke are a relatively privileged minority of a minority allowed to participate in a top quality workshop of an elite university. Oh. Oh. Second, I think there's I don't... it's hard to tell. It's hard for me to tell how privileged, like, because that just makes me think of like Twitter woke scolds and how privileged they are. I don't think they are necessarily. I feel like one of the reasons a lot of minority, because I'm only thinking about like woke scold stuff now and Twitter and shit, which is probably different from the Zizek thing. Well, it is, but it makes me think of... I don't know. I think when it comes to social media like YouTube and Twitter and Reddit and Discord communities and all that, I don't think that is an expression of privilege, like the woke scold thing. I think what that is people who have been so rejected and so damaged by the real world, by real life, and the way people just the way bigotry works, that they find a lot of safety online and in like online communities. Like they take refuge there. And the problem with that is that they end up in a place where they have been so beaten down by mainstream society, that they start to see threats and danger and like everywhere. So yeah, you get that kind of safe space fucking retaliation. Which is why, and then like, so you'll see red flags in like everyone. And then when you get into this space of being like in like a very safe space where there's actually quite a lot of you together, that can be like your first taste of like power, or like, and then that kind of like goes to people's heads a little bit, I think. It's like the same way that people who there's a kind of person who like gets bullied, but then later on finds themselves in a position of power, and then they become like the worst kind of bully. But that's only like explaining a small minority of like Twitter and fucking Discord communities. That doesn't explain like what he's talking about here. That's just my own observation. And people are arguing over whether or not I'm being accurate with that statement. Anyway, where am I? Oh, yeah. Second, the mystery resides in the functioning of the big other, the Telluride Administrative Authority in this case. The view gradually imposed on all by the awakened black elite was the view of minority, initially even among black participants. But how and why did these few not only succeed in terrorizing the majority, but even compelling the Telluride Association to take their side and decline to defend Lloyd? Why didn't they at least assume a more nuanced position? How does wokeness, although a minority view, manage to neutralize the larger liberal and leftist space, instilling in it a profound fear about openly opposing the woke? Psychoanalysis has a clear answer to this part. Okay. The notion of superego. Superego is a cruel and insatiable agency that bombards me with impossible demands and mocks my failed attempts to meet them. It is the agency in the eyes of which I am all the more guilty, the more I try to suppress my sinful strivings. The old cynical Stalinist motto by the accused at the show trials who profess their innocence. The more they are innocent, the more they deserve to be shot. Is superego at its purest. Okay, it's a Zizek article. We know now. We know it's a Zizek article. We know it's got a good piece of Stalinist trivia. That's another. So there have been like 2 good sentences in this article, and one is just like a completely irrelevant, inconsequential piece of Stalinist trivia. Is it even real? I don't know. Who knows? And did McQuarter, in the quoted passage, not reproduce the exact structure of the superego paradox? You must strive eternally to understand the experiences of black people. You can never understand what it is to be black, and if you think you do, you're a racist. In short, you must, but you can't because you shouldn't. The greatest sin is to do what you should strive for. This convoluted structure of an injunction, which is fulfilled when we fail to meet it, accounts for the paradox of superego. As Freud noted, the more we obey the superego commandment, the guiltier we feel. The paradox also holds in the Lacanian readings of the superego as an injunction to enjoy. Enjoyment is an impossible real. We can't ever fully attain it, and this failure makes us feel guilty. There might be. I'm just trying to relate this to my own personal experiences, but like I don't like to construct broad theories of the world based on the fights I've had with leftists. But if I was going to, I would say maybe the reason you don't apologize to woke scold communities is because they want you to apologize for like things that shouldn't be apologized for. And it's very rarely the case that any amount of explaining or apologizing will actually please them, you know? Unless you actually want to do that video of Bad Bunny self fucking flagellating and then crying about how transphobic she is uh, on stream in a Discord call. I don't know. Soy nods, yeah, which made people hate her more. Yeah, that's why Corbyn lost. He kept apologizing. Maybe. Although, was he trying to please woke scolds? Anyway, a series of situations that characterize today's society exemplify perfectly this type of superego pressure, like the endless PC self examination. Was my glance at the flight attendant too intrusive and sexually offensive? Did I use any words with a possible sexist undertone while addressing her? Yeah, poor Zizek. Must be a must be a struggle, eh? He's really talking from his own experience there. And so on and so on. The pleasure, thrill even, provided by such self probing is evident. Though, well, that's just him talking from his own experience, I'd imagine. Isn't Israel supporters the ultimate woke scolds? Well, why? What? Have you seen their government right now? They're pretty fucking. What, with the anti Semitism thing? Like, they'll call you anti Semitic for fucking anything. Like, that, yeah, that's a part of it. Yeah. Like, it's used in bad faith sometimes. Yeah. I know currently those riots in Huara are being, is that how you, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but those riots by the settlers where they've been setting fucking cars on fire and burning down trees and burned down houses, and one person died and 100 people have been injured. So naturally, even some Israeli organizations, B'Tselem and a few others, have described it as a pogrom. And people are getting very mad at them using the word pogrom because pogrom is a very Jewish centered word about, like, usually to describe crimes against Jews in Europe. And it reminds them possibly of whenever people like to compare Israel to, like, well, people will deliberately compare Israelis to Nazis or compare the state of Israel to the Nazi Germany or compare Israelis' actions to the Holocaust. But which people do say just to get under the skin of Jews, and it's quite cringe. But I like the pogrom thing for what happened yesterday is quite descriptive, right? Like it's descriptively accurate, I would say. Hey, Ms. Nanner, how's it going? Anyway, and does the same not hold even for the pathological fear some Western liberal leftists have of being counted guilty of Islamophobia? In this telling, any critique of Islam can only be an expression of Western Islamophobia. Salman Rushdie is denounced for unnecessarily provoking Muslims and thus, partially at least, inviting the fatwa condemning him to death. Whoa. The result is predictable. The more the Western liberal leftists probe their guilt, the more they are accused by Muslim fundamentalists of being hypocrites who try to conceal their hatred of Islam. The constellation again perfectly reproduces the paradox of the superego. The more you obey what the other demands of you, the guiltier you are. It is as if the more you tolerate Islam, the stronger its pressure on you will be. Oh God. Ah. Um. I've oh, I, I'm sure this happens. I've only seen it happen like once or twice, where someone took a reasonable critique of Islam and said it was fucking Islamophobia, but I don't know how common it is anyway. The superego structure then explains how and why, in the Telluride case, the majority and the institutional big other were both terrorized by the woke minority. All of them were exposed to a superego pressure that is far from an authentic call to justice. The black woke elite.
Remember the Holodomor?
That is not a good sentence. Oh no. Uptown Streamboat with a tier 1 sub. Thank you so much. Reddit? What? Okay. Okay. Is fully aware it won't achieve its declared goal of diminishing black oppression, and it doesn't even want that. What they really want is what they are achieving, a position of moral authority from which they may terrorize all others, without effectively changing social relations of domination. The situation of those terrorized by the woke elite is more complex, but still clear. They submit to woke demands because most of them really are guilty of participating in social domination, but submitting to woke demands offers them an easy way out. You gladly assume your guilt insofar as this enables you to go on living the way you did. It's the old Protestant logic. Do whatever you want, just feel guilty for it. Okay, again, this out of its context is a pretty cute thing. I know he means academic elite. It's just he did not do himself any favors with that phrase. It's really annoying because I feel like he could make good critiques here of like the way progressives get very there are so many critiques you could make of the way progressives gets too insular without any drive to win politically like we had with Sanders or with Corbyn. The only way people win now is by like purity testing and shrinking the movement rather than expanding. Scolding over trivial shit, like constant obsession with like little aesthetic cues. There's a lot of shit there that complete unwillingness to explain your positions to people who don't agree with you. The feeling that like, you know, it's not my job to educate you, like feeling like there are certain issues that are not settled at all in the mainstream, but acting as if they are. Yeah, there are loads of things that you can say with like the way that people sometimes talk as if the debate over like trans youth getting medical care is just like completely settled and done and no one should ever no you like at least half of the fucking world doesn't believe in that shit. Like most people in the world don't believe in that stuff. Even in progressive countries, like that's people still need to be convinced of that. But like there are some, it's such a progressive norm to act as if these situations are beyond debating anymore. Even though I would say like the facts are on the trans people's side in that case. Like but so there are problems you can point to there. It's just that he opened with like a completely uninformed like dog shit take on the trans rights issue in Scotland, and then I don't know. He's just yeah. It's like he saw a good argument, maybe, but he was like, I don't know. There's a brick wall of Lacan, transphobia, Freud, and I think Zizek might be Islamophobic. I don't know. I know he believed in the grooming gang narrative. He did believe that. He absolutely he wrote an article, I think he wrote an article about how it was it wasn't true that they were disproportionately abusing girls though. That wasn't true, but he believed it. He believed the Quilliam fucking 86% study or whatever. Um I don't know if that makes him Islamophobic necessarily, but like Dust Bowl, if you can't confirm that you're trolling me right now, I'm gonna ban you. I'm gonna ban you for being a fucking moron. Holy shit. There's a difference between acknowledging everyone knows that the grooming gangs were real. Everyone knows that. The grooming gang narrative is the idea that Muslims were making up a disproportionate amount of child sex abuse perpetrators in the UK. That was not confirmed by anyone. Did he say that? Yes. He said it was the same idea. It was the same example of like Western progressives not being willing to, because he was one of the ones who pushed the line that like the grooming gang epidemic is a big problem, and the left doesn't want to talk about it, and that's allowing the alt right to step in. And that was one. That was something that he said. Yeah, like he didn't, but like the problem was that the statistics for that thing like was bullshit. It was bullshit. The statistical claim was bullshit, as far as I remember. But like, I don't know. Maybe calling him Islamophobic is too far, but yeah, I don't know. He's definitely held up a few flags every now and then. Like, oh, wokeness effectively stands for its exact opposite. In his interpretation of dreams, a Freud reports in a dream dreamt by a father who falls asleep while keeping vigil at his son's coffin. In this dream, his dead son appears to him, pronouncing the terrible appeal, "Father, can't you see that I am burning?" When the father awakens, he discovers that the cloth in the son's coffin has caught fire from a falling candle. So, why did the father awaken? Was it because the smell of smoke got too strong, so that it was no longer possible to prolong the sleep by way of including it into the impoverished dream? Lacan proposes a much more interesting reading. Ugh. If the function of the dream is to prolong sleep, if the dream, after all, may come so near to the reality that causes it, can we not say that it might correspond to this reality without emerging from sleep? How can anyone read this person? Okay. After all, there is such a thing as sub-non-ambulistic activity. The question that arises, and which indeed all Freud's previous indications allow us here to produce, is what is it that wakes the sleeper? Is it not, in the dream, another reality? The reality that Freud describes thus, das Kind and German, that the child is near his bed, in am Arme fast, takes him by the arm and whispers to him reproachfully, German, 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 Father, can you see, German, German, that I am burning? Is there not more reality in this message than in the noise by which the father also identifies the strange reality of what is happening in the room next door? Is not the missed reality that caused the death of the child expressed in those words? I don't care. Okay. So it wasn't the intrusion of the signal from external reality that awakened the unfortunate father, but the unbearably traumatic character of what he encountered in the dream. Somnambulistic is sleepwalking. Okay. Insofar as dreaming means fantasizing in order to avoid confronting the real, the father literally awakened so that he could go on dreaming. The scenario is the following one. When his sleep was disturbed by the smoke, the father quickly constructed a dream which incorporated the disturbing element, smoke fire, in order to prolong his sleep. However, what he confronted in the dream was a trauma of his responsibility for the son's death, much stronger than reality, so he awakened into reality in order to avoid the real. And it is exactly the same with much of the ongoing woke movement. The woke awaken us to racism and sexism, precisely to enable us to go on sleeping. They show us certain realities so that we can go on ignoring the true roots and depth of our racial and sexual traumas. Okay. I think the get your claps out, guys. Get your soy claps. It's it's weird because there's almost an idea in there that could be fleshed out, and 90% of this article, which is total horseshit, could just be removed or I don't know. I really I gained nothing. There was a bit in it that I found interesting with the Freud reference, but I can't remember what it is. He's just soying. He's just like he's like soy nodding, but for anti woke people. That's what he's doing. He's literally the same energy as an incredibly fucking soy woke article. Copious amounts of cringe soy bullshit. Soy. Yeah. Just a very, very elaborate schizo post. I don't know what to mean. Yeah. This definitely was him, though. This is about the level of accuracy I expect from Zizek when he's talking about a trans issue, because he's done this before. This is like these two paragraphs here are just these are the two. This is the situation that I'm actually familiar with, and he's just got it completely wrong. But yeah, fuck it, man. I'm sure he was correct in the Lacan paragraphs.